Welcome everyone to today's webcast. This is webcast 3 of the Transform Your Business webcast series. Today's webcast is Become a Power User from the comfort of your own home, which I'm sure many of you are doing today. My name is Amanda Gordon. I'm the Senior Marketing Programs Manager here at Iconics. And before I turn things over to our presenters today, just to let you know, you are in a listen-only mode. That means if you have any questions throughout the webcast at any time, you can type them into the question feature within your GoToWebinar panel. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our two presenters today. Today we have Andre Scherpenzeel, our UK Technical Director, and Raymond van der Tas, who is our Solution Sales Supervisor of EMEA. And kicking things off now is Raymond.
Thank you, Amanda. So welcome everybody. We bring you now to the Netherlands. Today we would like to let me move to the next slide. There we go. So within 45 minutes, we would like to turn you all into power users. And to do so, we'll explain you about equipment classes, clone dynamics, responsive design, and all of those. So, but first, let's introduce a little bit Iconics. We have been around over 30 years. We started in 1986. And thanks to our partner network with over 400 organizations, we have installed 375,000 applications. We work closely with Microsoft and have been awarded 6 times the Partner of the Year award in different industry segments. So you see in the bottom that Iconic solutions can be found in infrastructure projects such as the metro, the train, the tunnels, the airports, but also in oil and gas exploration fields and renewable energy projects, water management, and also in thousands of intelligent buildings around the globe. We're also proud to tell you that since last summer, we merged with the Mitsubishi Electric Group, and we continue to pride ourselves as being open to any hardware vendor that you may choose to automate your process. So in summary, the Iconic software stack is used in many different industries, and your beer that you're holding right now may have been bottled with the Iconic solution. But we also play more critical roles at airports, for instance. So in the bottom, we see the KLM flight landing, bringing in the last visitors. And the Iconic solution keeps an eye on the traffic control center. And also the complete indoor climate management of the airport is handled by the Iconic solution. And in addition, the high availability of the airport fuel supply of the tank farms are connected to Iconics as well. So how do we do this? How do we connect those systems? So let's start with the first feature we want to express today, which is the clone dynamic. The clone dynamic can be found in the Iconics GraphWorks 64 solution. And you basically draw any object, any visible object, so typically some visible smart symbols or some process points, and then you hit the clone dynamic function. And the solution then runs on any client device, including desktop, web, and mobile devices. So you start with drawing a single object. So I have this gray mouse in the bottom. And of course, the mouse itself is not very interesting until we connect it to a set of data, an array or a data set. So the data set provides us information about this clone and which color, which size, which location it needs to position itself on the dashboard. And then during runtime, GraphWorks automatically creates a number of copies, just as many as your data set contains. And the number n is dynamically assigned, so meaning that if the number changes during runtime, then also the number of objects will dynamically redraw on your screen. So what's the advantage? Well, before you would have to guess the theoretic maximum number of objects that you would draw in your graphic. And then you would use some hide show action to basically hide the non-relevant objects during runtime, which is all fine. But your document size on the hard disk is probably 100 times bigger than necessary. And that means that the loading time of your graphic is also a lot slower than required. And in the end, if your graphic is handed over to your colleague in 5 years from now, it would be very hard to maintain your solution. So that's why the clone dynamic will help you to improve that. So also, if you guessed the wrong maximum number, then your solution would not have been scalable in the future. So let's clone some data from a data set. So we have this virtual company called Northwind, and they offer a couple of product categories. And within the iconic solution, you use this property, the @count property. And if you then tie it into your dynamic, in your clone dynamic, you see it on the right-hand side of the screen, then the number of instances is detected from your data set. And what the clone dynamic then does during runtime, it applies a number to the instance local alias, the green one in the bottom, and then iterates through all the elements in your data set and then draws the object that it needs to clone. So in this example, I have two simple process points. I have the category name that I want to see on the user dashboard and also the description of the category. And then the alias is automatically resolved. Now, as you know, the iconic catalog, the asset catalog, provides all the information about your equipment and your assets. And what you may not know is that every asset also has some helper properties. And one of them is the child equipment count. So by looking at that property, we know, or you know, exactly how many children objects, how many equipment you would find below your master higher level equipment. And then also another property is the array that provides the children equipment point names. So let's take an example. The expression that you see here is using a simple get@add function. So let's get at the first element in the array, position 0, and it then returns the name of your child, your first child in the list of assets. And that first child, of course, has a number of properties. Yeah, like temperatures, pressures, flows, whatever metadata you want to expose in your asset. And here I assume that one of the properties is called supply water temperature. Now, if we combine this all together, then the last statement is just using a value of statement. It returns the actual value of that particular property of the child that you didn't know about before. So it all sounds very complicated, but it becomes easy when you start to play with it. So here we see the process point again in the top of our screen. And what you do is you take your clone object and you place it in a panel. On the right-hand side, we see that we have a variety of panels. And for instance, if you use the stack panel, then one object is stacked just above the other. So if you have 100 objects, you will see a long list with objects. And if you then put that in a scroll panel, as you see in the bottom, then also the user can scroll down through all the elements that your clone dynamic created. Now imagine that your data set contains some location information. If we take indoor navigation equipment, you may have XY coordinates of your assets within the building, within the floors. And then using those dynamic information, your object, your clone object, could dynamically position itself on the floor plan. So you use basically the local or location dynamic to position in XY coordinates. Now, if you place the same object on a map, like Google Maps, then the geographic coordinates, longitude, latitude, could be used from your asset. Now, if you put all those panels and information into a dashboard, you will know that your dashboards are not only desktops, but could also be phones and tablets and head-mounted tablets, for instance. So you want to make your graphics responsive. Now, the advantage of responsiveness is that you create one single content and it scales automatically to the available space on your device. So let's have a look at this screen. On the left-hand side, we see a menu bar, and it has a number of elements that the user can select from. In the top, you see maybe some logo, and on the right-hand side, maybe some user access control, login, logout. Now, if we open the same graphic on a different device with a smaller resolution, you see that only 18 panels of information are shown in the middle of the screen. And if we go further to a phone, you see that only 8 objects are maybe shown. And even the menu bar on the left-hand side automatically collapses. And maybe you want to add this hamburger icon in the top left corner to then show the menu again when the user would like to pick anything from the menu. So how is this done? Well, if you look at the main screen, the title bar is then positioned in a grid control. And inside your grid control, you position what we call a canvas. And if you are one of the art painters, like the Van Goghs, the Rembrandts, they always use canvas. Now, the beauty of canvas is that you can position and draw anything on a location, and then it scales also in the size if you make a smaller painting or a bigger painting. So if you position them in the grid, then suddenly that canvas also scales within the grid. On the left-hand side, you have a number of menu items. You don't know if it will be 1 or 10 or 50. So therefore, you position your menu object in the scroll stack panel. And then in the middle, the content panel, you have all kind of informational documents. And if you put that in a scroll wrap panel, the advantage is that when you have a wide screen, all the panels are shown in a horizontal manner. If you have a small screen like a phone, then suddenly all the objects will automatically reorder and rewrap in a vertical position. Now imagine you click on one of those content panels, like content number 17, then on the right-hand side, the detail side panel will show up, showing content about that particular object. And if you position it in a grid control, it automatically sizes. And if that grid then also contains a scroll stack panel, then it shows the number of elements exposed for that object. So all of that is completely dynamic, because if you click on another panel, maybe you have less or more details to show. So the next item we'd like to discuss is how to efficiently build the asset catalog. So the asset catalog is where you define all your equipment, all your classes. And I would like to hand over the presentation to André Scherpenzeel from our UK office to tell you more about this.
Thank you, Raymond. As Raymond said, I want to go into how to create many objects using equipment classes and the back tool. The back tool is our bulk asset configuration utility, and it will really makes it much easier to kind of optimize your configuration process and speed up your deployment process. So if I just go here, so effectively a standardized deployment process that we use ourselves when we deploy anything is effectively really made up out of 5 big steps. We identify some system requirements. What kind of site do we want to deploy? What kind of system do we want to deploy? Which is really, in effect, a documentation exercise. Then there may be a device configuration activity, which will be done by the PLC engineers. And then effectively, there's 3 stages in the Iconix core product, which is basically the configuration of the communication, i.e. how do we talk to our PLCs or to our outstations. Then how do we create the assets that go with that, and a certain level of display configuration. To go in a little bit more detail of those items, I've kind of split them out. So as I said, the first 2 steps, which are kind of outside of the Iconix environment, is basically to collect the system-specific information. So that could be what kind of device do you want to use, an Allen Bradley PLC, a Siemens PLC, or a variety of different RTUs if you do utilities. Kind of identify what kind of protocol, maybe it's even using MQTT or Azure IoT Hub, and effectively identify what kind of address space and registers you have in use on those sites. And like I said, that is it's almost like a documentation exercise more than anything else. The next step is then that the PLC engineer will deploy a new site or deploy a new system, use their programming software for that PLC to create that system, and then effectively deploys that program to the system. Now, if that is the same type of site over and over again, that may just simply be reloading the same program and pushing it out. Or if it's a new site, it may be creating a new program from scratch. But these are kind of the activities that are taking place outside of the Iconix environment. So once we kind of then jump into the Iconix environment, the first thing is then to set up the communication. So as I mentioned, it can be all kinds of different communications. So there's a number of Iconix native protocols, Modbus, BACnet. We can use other OPC servers, such as from Kepler and other vendors. But we can also actually start integrating IoT devices into this environment in exactly the same way. So we would use MQTT or AMQP via IoT Hub, but also event hubs, event grids, Kafka, a wide variety of mechanisms to get data from systems out there, LoRaWAN, anything that is really appropriate at that level. So we set up the device-specific configuration inside the Iconix environment in the workbench. Then, depending on the protocol that you use, you may actually just simply discover the driver details. So we can discover the PLC program or the BACnet registers for certain types of devices, or we can identify the templates. Typically anything that comes in via IT it has like a JSON fragment, and we can parse that JSON fragment and identify the data items and the data values, and then we configure that, and we effectively set up the mapping from the device parts to the iconics parts. The next step is basically then to create an asset configuration, and also some of these things also in the actual product in a moment. But just from a from a PowerPoint point of view, we would normally define different types of assets. So that could be an asset for site of type 1 or type 2, or if you have a say a distribution center, you may have different asset definitions for conveyor 1, conveyor 2, conveyor 3, or if you have a chemical plant, it may be for different kinds of equipment like mixing vessels, or things for boiling, etc. So each of these asset definitions will have some data point definitions or an alarm definitions that could basically include the live data, historical data, and the alarm data as well. If your devices, and especially this is relevant if you get data from IoT devices, also contain some dataset data that can also become part of the asset definition as well. And then effectively we put that all together and create a new site template or a new system template or a new asset. And effectively that template can then be used over and over again. So if you have repeat sites, you can use the same template without having to go through all this process again. You just kind of fill in the blanks and move on and deploy it again, as we will show in the demonstration as well. The second part, once you have created templates, you then really start instantiating it, and this is kind of the type of optimization that we're looking for, is that you start looking for sameness or similarities. That kind of is all captured in the template, and then effectively when you instantiate a particular site or a particular conveyor or a particular vessel in a chemical plant, you only have to fill in the details that are relevant for the instantiation, and all these standard things will automatically be inherited from the template and created by the bulk asset tool to in the environment, in the workbench environment for you. And that really kind of greatly improves the the amount of sites or the amount of systems that you can deploy quite quickly, as we'll show in the demo. The next step then is to look at what do you have from a display point of view. So as part of your deployment, you've created an asset, be it a conveyor, be it a water station, or a chemical vessel. You may already have a display that contains all the relevant details for that, and in that case you can reuse it. As soon as you reinstantiate that template, it will automatically reuse the display. But if you have a completely brand new site type or a system type, you obviously would create new displays or derive a new display using information from existing displays, or reuse your symbols, standardized symbols that you have created. Then you make sure that you normalize it. Effectively, that typically means you're using the asset structure and you're replacing part of the hierarchy by a local alias, and so that effectively when you click on a particular site or a particular system, the local alias set to the right asset, and then effectively you can start using that new existing or updated display. So I think a lot of this probably will become a little bit more clear and a bit more interesting once we go into the demo. So let me just switch over to a different screen. So the screen we're looking at now is a little example that we've made that is quite representative of a utility company, but of course the same capabilities in the Iconics product can be used inside the whether or not you have a chemical plant or a factory or anything like that. Anyway, so let me click on the map again when I refresh my window here. So what we've got here is a chunk of the UK, which is called Shropshire. It doesn't really have its own water company, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we've made a water company called Shropshire Water. We've divided the area into 4 zones: north, south, Shrewsbury, and Delford. And effectively, at the moment, it kind of has some main indicators here to kind of highlight what's going on. But the more interesting thing, talking about kind of repeatability and cloning and responsive design, is if I start choosing on the side here, I'll pick an asset type. So this is a list of all the asset types that are available. In this particular setup, there are a bunch of filters. So the first thing I'll do is I'll switch to a reservoir, for example. So what you now see are all the reservoirs in this kind of area, and it highlights in red if some of them are in alarm status, or purple if they have a comms failure, or blue if they're in the monitor status. So Most of them are fine. I can click on, well, I can hover above it. It will give us some detail in the top left-hand corner. I also can click on this icon, and then effectively it will show me some details, kind of as Raymond highlighted. All these icons here are created using a clone tool, so there's only a single instance that has actually ever been drawn, and I'll show you that in GraphWorks configuration mode in a little while. But if you click on it, it then basically drives the information on the right-hand side based on the object that you click on. So in this case, I clicked on Ellesmere, it will show you Ellesmere. If I click on this one for Lower Upton, it will show you the details for Lower Upton. So as you can see, the same site schematic can then also be used. So if I click on this button here, it's called site schematic, it will reload a screen. And this is again quite important. This template, this screen is a template, this display is a template. So we only create one version of this mimic that represents a 2-tank reservoir, and with the relevant pumps and valves and flows and measurements that we have, but we only create it once. If I go back to a different site and I click on the site schematic for that site, I would get exactly the same information. A couple of other things here on the site. So obviously some information from the site, then a bit of alarm data about the site, and then some key data. And again, this is created using the clone tool. So for every site, we highlight what is key data in the asset catalog as part of the templating mechanism. And in this case, there's 5 bits of information, a couple of flows and pressures, and a level. And then each of the key data points will just simply become available, including the trending to go with it. So I can just drag things in here, and these are just some dummy simulated values, but you can kind of see just with a simple drag drop, we can get the data in this window. Now, if you have a multi-monitor setup, obviously you can also drag that trend window into another screen that has a big full-size trend window if you wanted to compare the flow in one area with the flow in another area, or your production data from your chemical vessel in system 1, 2, or 3, basically. So if I go back to the map for a moment and give you another example, and then we'll go into a bit of the background of this. So if I just kind of show you the pumping stations. So effectively, these are all the pumping stations that are available. If I click on one of those, what we then see is similarly a side panel, but now in this case it will only have one key data point, because for pumping stations, for this example, we only have one bit of key data. And if I look at the site schematic, it will know that it was a pumping station, and it will show you a different kind of mimic, basically. And these mimics or these displays can be as simple or as complicated as required. So how does this work in the background? So if I go now to our workbench, so what we have in here is, let me minimize this window. So this is the Iconics workbench where everything is configured. And what you'll find here is, if I just look into this section called SW, which is the Shropshire Water kind of section, you have a large number of sites in here. And each of these sites basically contain data. So if I just do a refresh on this for a second, to kind of get the most up-to-date list, I can find a reservoir that I clicked on before, which was Ellesmere. So I'll double click on that. And as you can see in here, there is a booster pump, a bypass, a reservoir. In the reservoir, we have then the level, the flows, and the pressure. So these are all kind of the standard components that are being created by the templates. So if I scroll down a little bit, I can show you where those templates are defined. So they are part of what we call the equipment classes. And there's all kinds of equipment classes in this particular environment, because I use this one for a variety of different demos. But if I go to the site section for today, I have a couple of very simple equipment classes. We have an actual site, and if you can look here in the details on the right-hand side, you'll see that the site will have an address, some com status information documents, which is the data set, postcode for its location, whether or not it has a telephone PSTN connection, a radio connection, or whether or not it was via Ethernet IP. But there's all kinds of different details in there, and also kind of key information such as the site type, which we can then use to drive which display is being loaded when we click on the button. Similarly, we have other items such as equipment, which is what we use for pumps and things like that, and it just has a presence flag. And we have some simple data points, like an analog data point in this case, for if some ranges, units, value, etc. So these are all individually created items. And then the key part in here is, if I open one of these up, and look, for example, on the value. Make this a bit more clearer. So what we have in here is that basically we have a placeholder, in this case slash question mark value question mark slash, and that is the thing that we can fill in basically by filling out the Excel spreadsheets. For the historical data, we can have things either enabled or disabled, and you know, if there's data sets, we can enable or disable that as well. So if I now go into the spreadsheets that kind of drive these things, so just remember, before I go into the spreadsheet, there's 3 bits of information here: analog data points, equipments, and sites. So these are kind of 3 different templates that we have used to drive and create the screens that you saw a moment ago. I will now minimize this window and go back to my Excel spreadsheet. So this is a long list of about, well, as I scroll down, about 140 different sites. And for each of these sites, I have the equipment class called site. So as I mentioned before, that had properties such as an address, a postcode, a region, and also a longitude and latitude. What kind of communication, a system type, RTU or SCADA, you know, all kinds of different settings. But all of these columns, so everything that you see here, region or system type or communication type, is actually used inside the actual definition of the site. If we go back here, sorry, click on this one, the site. These properties here for address, as you can see, will have the placeholder slash question mark address question mark slash, and that is exactly the name of the column that you have in Excel. So whatever placeholder you put into your equipment class, that is placeholder here will be used, and it will use the values that you have from that particular site. So what I'm going to do now is actually, I have a slightly smaller screen as well, so I'm going to add a new site. So this is a site called Lawton with some details. It's a pumping station. It has a particular longitude, latitude, and some other properties, whether or not it's an Ethernet-based site, and some other properties go with it. So I'll go back to my workbench. I'm just going to double check that it is not in here at the moment. So just to do it properly. Yeah, okay, it's here. So what I'll do, I'll delete it from the list. So we don't want that one anymore. Then the next thing I do is I'm going to open up the bulk asset configuration utility. So in here, I'm going to open my template file. So open this one here. And what it says here, basically, and there's a couple of things I'll do in a moment, but I'm going to create an alarm configuration. I'm going to create a hyperstoring configuration as appropriate. There's some details about where my asset works is located, where my hyperstoring is located, and whether or not I want to create new items, update existing items, or delete existing non-existing items. And you can even run it as a simulate instantiation, so it will do everything, but then at the very end, it will do a rollback, so nothing has actually been committed. So I'm going to import my slightly different Excel file. So I'm just going to pick that site called Lawton, which I showed you with that one row in it. I'll click on that and click on open, and then I'm going to execute that. So what this now does, it will actually load that Excel file and effectively process it. And then in here, as you can see, it will tell me all the things it has done. So as I kind of alluded to, there's a number of different properties. So there was a latitude, longitude, address. So each of these properties has now been created again in the asset catalog, and with some relevant parameters in there. And effectively, as you can see, there are no errors. These are just information notifications to say, tell us what it's done, and it will maintain a log of that so that you can actually use it as a traceability matrix as well. If I minimize this, so as you may remember, I just deleted the Lawton site from here. If I now do a refresh on this again, say discard that, that's fine. And then in here, somewhere along the way, under the L, the site is now back, and with all the properties that come out of the Excel spreadsheet. At this point in time, this site doesn't really have any data items in it. What I did for this purpose, and I'll go back and show you the next Excel spreadsheet, is I've actually separated out the information I needed for the site, which I showed you here. I separated that out from the information that describes the site and what is there. The reason why this is commonly done is because the people that may be rolling out sites may be one person, whereby the people that do the PLC work and kind of define the PLC program may be a different person. So the bulk asset configuration utility allows you to kind of actually separate it out. So you can have as many Excel spreadsheets as you want and really separate it out by function. So in this case, this is just a little list of the data points. As I said, it's not a particularly complicated site. So what we're saying is here, we have 3 different equipment classes. We use the equipment. So we say, okay, we have a pumping station, and that pumping station contains a pump 1 and a pump 2. And then effectively we have, on that pumping station, we have an analog data point which represents the flow, and each of the pumps will have a status data point, so that is a slightly different equipment class. So each of these reflect the equipment classes that I've previously shown in the workbench. And then the key part here is that you fill in, and these are some simulation tags basically of different kinds, but this is where you would point it to your PLC tag. You may type in some low and high ranges if they're not automatically defined. You could type in some units, and also at this point in time, for in this case the flow, we actually have an alarm template called a flow alarm. We have a high limit and a low limit. On top of that, it could also have seasonal high and low limits as appropriate, or extra high and low limits. But in practical terms, you fill in a couple of fields that are relevant and that are specific to each site. If I now go to the workbench, sorry, to the remote desktop again and open my bulk asset configurator. So I'll close this because this is the site that we've imported. I'll close that down. Then I'll basically change my import file to actually look at the site tag. So this will actually create the site. So as I showed you here on the left-hand side, there is nothing underneath the Lawton site at the moment, just a couple of details about address and some static information. If I now run this object, so this Excel spreadsheet, and I'll click on execute, the list will be a bit longer now, because obviously it's creating not just a single site, it's actually creating pieces of equipment on that site. So if I make this a little bit wider so you can see this, you can see here that it has created the pumping station, it has created pump 1, pump 2, it has created the flow data point, but also with all the values, the low ranges, high ranges, units, etc. And for the pumps, for both pumps, it has added the status data points, so like the value, the failed, stopped, alarm active, etc. on there. And effectively then again everything has gone through successfully. I'll close this window down, minimize this one. I'll refresh the Lawton part of the AssetWorks 3, and as you can see now, pump 1, 2, and pumping station details have all been kind of put into the system. If I now go back to the map in HTML5, so go back to my browser. Now let me just reload the map here. What we now have is basically a site. So if I do, it was a pumping station, and it is a site here. It's called Lawton, as you can see in the top left hand side. If I click on that, it will have the relevant details. The one alarm, it currently happens to be an alarm. And if you go this data point, and you will find that this will have very little data, because I've only instantiated this about a minute ago. But as you can see here, because this site has existed before, you see the dotted line because there was some data way back when. But when I re-instantiated it, the green line started coming into play again, and that's kind of the data that's been logging in the background. But the key part here is that once you have this template, updating it and rolling out multiple sites actually becomes quite a simple exercise. And we have deployed this mechanism for both utilities, as kind of shown here, but also for a big car factory. We did we worked with some system integrators on the deployment of this new paint shop. So they had about 500-600 conveyors throughout the paint shop, and effectively they worked out the PLC code, made standardized units, and effectively the deployment of the 600 conveyors was very much a case of filling in an Excel spreadsheet, pointing it to the right function block in the code, so that didn't even specify individual tags, because everything was controlled by function blocks in the PLC code. And then effectively it just kind of became a row of 500-600 rows in Excel, and the whole configuration was created in one go. All the assets were standardized, so therefore the testing was far quicker. And all of these things make it a very good way of deploying your systems. And it's also the maintainability and the version control of your system becomes quite a lot easier and far better control, basically. So just to give you a couple of examples of what actually was happening in the background then. So if I just go back to here, what I'll do from the PowerPoint. 1 second, go back here. So the graphic screen that effectively you see actually in real terms is created like this. So what you have, there's a circle here. This circle, as you can kind of look in the Explorer here, is made up out of a non-scalable layer, so that's at layer 7. And then there's a group of 2 items. One is a circle and one is a push pin. So at the moment, I got the location group at the very top selected, which is the whole entity together. And what you can see here, there's effectively a clone tool on it. And that clone tool is doing a database query against all asset locations using the add count, as Raymond had shown you before, and using the instance field to kind of drive that. There are 3 high dynamics on it and a pick field. So the pick field is there to kind of click on things and open the right side. So if I go one level down to the next part of it, there is a push pin, as I mentioned, inside the screen. And as you can see here at the top basically, there's a source data source. And if you use the source data source, you can basically type in a path. And although it's not completely visible here, that path is actually working out from the query what kind of site it is. And based on that, it will just open the right PNG file. So the PNG files are not even actually stored inside the screen, they're just referenced. So if I go back to the runtime version of the screen, if I close this down for a second and show you all assets for a moment. So these are all the assets that we have defined on this side. If I zoom into this, you can kind of see that these site assets are of different kinds, basically, be it a valve scheme, be it a reservoir, or be it a pumping scheme. Basically, each of these will be visible there. But it's really, and I think that's the key part, it is just a simple single type of object, and it just simply kind of changes what you want to see. If I just do a couple of times, so the treatment works top left, top bottom, reservoirs, pumping stations, and these things, we can kind of enable them and disable them as we go along. The other part that we've done, again, use the clone tool for, that works quite well. If I just go to a little bit further down, we also do this for vehicles. So we've integrated with a number of vehicle tracking providers, and we can actually say, okay, these are the cars, so these are the operational vehicles, or maybe a commercial vehicle, or a clean water vehicle. And again, this could be whatever data it is, can be positioned. And because this is all dynamic, we don't know even in advance how many cars a particular customer may have. We just bind it to the data source, and if they roll out another car, they don't even have to tell us. The next time the car gives us an update where it is, it will just simply show up on the map, and we will be able to see where a particular vehicle is on the map, basically. So I think that is pretty much what I wanted to show you today. Hopefully, if I go back to the PowerPoint here, sorry, wrong one. Click here. So these are some of the examples of the templates. As I said, the mimic is created for a reservoir using live data. So, and that's effectively the end of the demonstration.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. Let me switch to my screen here and show you my conclusion slides. Okay, and now I'd like to talk to you about the Iconics Worldwide Customer Summit Transform 360. We recently rescheduled this in-person event to May 4th through 7th, 2021 at Foxwoods Resort and Casino in Connecticut. If you already signed up for the event and you'd signed up for the previous dates, we've just moved your registration already to the new dates, so no action needed on your part. If you haven't already signed up, I encourage you to do so. This event is going to be bigger and better in 2021. We have a number of exciting guest speakers lined up, as well as compelling demos to show you. If you register by April 19th, you can do so at iconics.com/transform360. We have a number of promotions that we put up on our social media pages from time to time, including complimentary registration promo codes. So I encourage you to follow us on social so you can see those and sign up. I really hope to see you all there at this live in-person event. I'd also like to share with you a number of on-demand webcast recordings that we have available at iconics.com/webcast. If you've enjoyed today's webcast, you can see the other topics that we have covered this year. And not only do we have these North American webcasts, but we also have a number of international versions as well. So let me get to some of the questions. One of the questions I had come in, which I've had from a few people, is this webcast being recorded? And yes, it is. We will send out an email on Monday that will include a link to the recording. We're also posting those recordings on our webcast page as well. Let me get to the other questions that came in here, just a moment. And these questions are for Andre and Raymond. So the first question that came in which version are these functions available?
Shall I take that answer? So typically we use the latest version, 10.9.6, but all these features shown today are supported starting off 10.95.4. So and if you ensure that you have your 10.9.5 installed with the latest update, you can do everything we showed today.
Okay, that was a good answer. The next question that came in, is there a limit to the number of cloned object you can have in a display?
No, I'll take that answer then. So there is no limit, and I think there's actually quite a lot of benefit to having cloned objects in that since you only have to draw them once, your screens are actually a lot smaller because there is only one instance. And then in runtime, it will generate the right number of actual users. So be it 50 or 500, it's actually a lot more efficient to use a clone dynamic if you can.
Okay, great. Next question, can you use multiple Excel spreadsheets to configure asset works?
I can answer that. I saw Andre doing it. So the answer is yes, you can use an unlimited amount of spreadsheets. So if your project is small, you may just use one and you document all the asset properties and all the metadata in that document. But the larger the applications become, the more relevant it becomes to outsource some of those spreadsheets to different functional people. Like Andre mentioned that some people are responsible for sites, other ones are more technical on the pump equipment, the other ones are maybe more on the flow types, flow controllers. Whatever the expertise is, those people can then fill in their subset of the spreadsheet, and then you just have to run the bulk asset generation a few times to consolidate all those changes.
Thank you, Raymond. I think the next question, maybe Andre, would be directed to you. The engineering steps that were described in the asset configuration, are those possible to perform by API from another application?
Yeah, most, if not all, things that are done by Iconix products can be done by the API as well. So yeah, if people have specific interest, just drop an email to the support team and we'll get you the right details if that's where you want to go. But yes, we can definitely automate this, command line this, PowerShell this, or go via a low-level API as appropriate.
Okay, and what, as Andre said, he brought up a good point. We're happy to follow up with anyone offline. So again, I've listed the number here where you can call us, or you can email webcast@iconix.com for any of the questions that we didn't get to today. And we will be reaching out to others who asked questions to follow up with those offline. We also definitely are happy to offer personal demos. So please email sales@iconix.com if you have a need for a personal demo for your company. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Andre and Raymond, and everyone. Hope you all stay safe and healthy, and hope to see you on a future webcast.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.